The author respectfully submits it as his firm and immovable conviction that the United States of America, in years to come, will govern the entire Western Hemisphere. The Stars and Stripes, which never knew, nor ever will know defeat, will, in years to come, gather under its protecting folds, every nation and every island in this hemisphere. It is a duty we Americans owe to the republics of Central and South America to give them the benefits of our Pacific government, the rule of the people, by and for the people, exemplified in the great Constitution of the United States of America. Our American flag already protects and defends every republic in the Americas. How many years will it require to convince the Central and South American republics that their security and path of safety is to come under the flag that already protects them? Our glorious starry banner will rule the entire Western Hemisphere. It would be the emblem of peace, liberty, and civilization floating over a united America from Alaska to Patagonia. This is America's destiny. If this book serves to stimulate patriotic pride and strengthen respect for our liberty-loving flag, it then will not have been written in vain. Most respectfully submitted, the author. That's right, we're in for a wild ride. Looking forward, A Dream of the United States of the Americas in 1999 is a speculative fiction novella by Arthur Byrd, a vice consul general at the U.S. Embassy in Haiti. The book was published in 1899, a time where the U.S. was rapidly industrializing and becoming an imperial power. The title is an obvious nod to Edward Bellamy's 1887 best-selling sci-fi novel, Looking Backward, where the protagonist wakes up in the year 2000 in an America that embodies Bellamy's utopian socialist views. Unlike Bellamy's book, Looking Forward doesn't even have a semblance of a plot. It's basically just Byrd's prolonged wet dream of a thick America, divided into sections by subject. You have some chapters on flying machines, some on the future of fine arts, and so on. So there's not really much sense in me summarizing the book linearly or chronologically. I'm just going to break up the book into a few major topics so we can get a sense of what Byrd imagined the far-off year of 1999 would bring. The first thing you should know about this book is that Byrd has the hugest possible hate boner for Spain. It all stems from the Spanish-American War, which took place 1 year before the book was published. The sinking of the USS Maine that catalyzed the war is basically the equivalent of 9/11 for Byrd. And the Battle of Manila Bay, won by Commodore George Dewey, is like the Battle of Yorktown. Here are some examples that showcase just how much Byrd thinks the fallout of the Spanish-American War will influence the country's trajectory. Byrd references a Dewey monument in Manhattan somewhere near Grant's tomb. He writes that, in 1999, it was reckoned a high distinction for any American to be able to say that his father, brother, or relative took part in the great victory at Manila. And most interestingly, he has May 1st, 1998, the centennial of the battle, proclaimed Dewey Day in honor of the Commodore. Oh, and Dewey also becomes president sometime in the early 1900s. Meanwhile, in our timeline, the Spanish-American War is just a footnote. Americans have endured far worse tragedies than the sinking of the Maine, and we produced far more remarkable military strategists than Dewey. Also, Dewey was hopelessly unable to win even the Democratic Party nomination in 1900, much less the presidential election, and that was less than 2 years after the Battle of Manila Bay. But it really puts into perspective how the significant events unfolding around us will one day too become smaller pieces of history. I was only half joking when I called the sinking of the Maine Byrd's 9/11. Remember the Maine was once on every American's lips. Now the Spanish-American War and the 268 sailors who perished that fateful day are half a day's American history lesson. Then you never think about them again until you dust a book like this off the shelf. And the march of time will relegate the Iraq War 9/11 into obscurity one day too. Continuing on, Byrd's hatred towards Spain and the Spaniards is the driving force of the first half of his book, and it reaches a boiling point that results in the country's annihilation. But first, I have to talk to you about weapons of mass destruction. In a lot of future war books of the era, the author envisions some catastrophic weapon of mass destruction capable of frightening the world into an everlasting peace. In this story, the WMDs are airships loaded with TNT. Yep. The idea is, hover one of these bad boys over an enemy city or army, detonate it, and everything below goes to kingdom come. It's a faint foreshadow of the atomic bomb, which is also airborne and detonated overhead. Byrd just has no idea of how terrible WMDs can get when we're harnessing the power of nuclear fission. In Looking Forward, the civilized nations of the world agree that no one will ever use these warships, which Byrd calls Death Angels, against another country, unless it's to punish it for using one first. So naturally, Spain decides to use the Death Angel against Morocco. Thus, the nations of the world have no choice but to wipe Spain off the map. It should be obvious how stupid this is. Spain knew from the get-go that if they used their WMDs, they would be obliterated by the international order. So why not do a preemptive strike on a European power? Or the United States? It's rather convenient that they only deployed the Death Angels against the non-white Moroccans, and then after that, they don't even try to fight back. So yeah, Spain is annihilated. We can only imagine how many Spaniards died in the catastrophe, but the survivors flee the peninsula and become a diaspora. Like modern Jews, who had lost their Palestine, the Spanish were thereafter to be scattered over the face of the globe, with no country and no national ensign of their own. Apparently, no one cares. Spain's flagrant violation of the international treaty in 1929, when she wantonly destroyed Fez and Tangier, was universally condemned. On the other hand, the destruction and razing of Spain in 1930, as a punishment for her bad faith, received the warmest commendations of the world. It was fully realized that Spain's chastisement fitted her case as perfectly as the bark fits the tree that it encircles. I guess genocide's an appropriate punishment if a country's leadership does something bad, especially if it's Spain. Byrd's imperialism is interesting because he doesn't imagine the US going to war with any Latin American country. Rather, they all just voluntarily relinquish their sovereignty and accede to the United States. Jamaica opts to join in 1899, Mexico follows in 1912, Canada in 1930, Brazil in 1931, and soon enough, the US controls the entire hemisphere. How high do you have to be on your own nationalism to think that within 3 decades of the present, 2 whole continents worth of countries will voluntarily petition to be annexed by your government? If you ask me, the prediction is the combined result of Byrd's extreme American exceptionalism and aversion to militarism. Byrd thinks the US is above petty European wars, so of course we never bog ourselves down conquering Latin America and causing tens of millions of casualties. On the other hand, the US is too dang cool to not own the entire hemisphere, so the entire Americas has to just fall in the US's hands. The annexation brings the total number of states up to 85, and having control of the entire hemisphere, the nation styles itself as the United States of the Americas. In 1990, the capital is moved to Mexico City, which is renamed Washington, while the former capital becomes Columbia. Again, I guess Mexico raises no objections. The seat of government is moved because 1. The US controls a lot more territory now, and Mexico City is more of a central location, and 2. Byrd thinks that the climate will be better. And this is by far his most reasonable take in the entire book. I mean, the dry heat of Mexico City beats DC humidity any day of the year. The human population of Byrd's world is bigger than you could ever imagine, standing at a whopping 2 billion. The population of the USA, which is to say the population of all the Americas, comes to 531 million. The British Empire also lords over some 500 million souls, 350 million of which live in India. As you would expect, decolonization never happens. The world population in Byrd's own time would have been between 1.5 billion and 1.7 billion. That's a 50% increase in the previous century. And Byrd only imagined the global population increasing by a few 100 million in the next century. So I'm not sure if the author expected birth rates to slump or what. The actual world population in 1999 was around 6 billion, so really, Byrd missed the mark. Regarding religion, Byrd envisions a Christian future. At the close of the 20th century, indications pointed to a general Christianizing of all peoples of the globe. Even Japan was rapidly coming under the banner of the cross. Apparently, the Ottoman Empire also gives Jerusalem to Germany in 1940, so it can be governed by Christians. Because why wouldn't a Muslim country give up one of their holy cities to a Christian one as a gesture of goodwill? Thank God Germany didn't get Jerusalem in 1940 in our timeline. Byrd also asserts that the Jews are content to remain scattered across the globe, so they'll have no desire to return to the Holy Land. Another prediction that did not age well. We can draw big parallels between Christianity taking over the world and the US taking over the Western Hemisphere. Byrd wills it to happen, so it does. Byrd doesn't talk much about race. This is a curious omission given the fact that the US now controls everything south of the Rio Grande, Latinos and all. But he does have the Latin American states adopting English as their official language, so I think the implication is that in his world, non-white Hispanics are just becoming white. But Byrd breaks his silence at the very end of the book, and to provide a solution for American racial tensions, send all the blacks to Venezuela. There, racism solved. As you might expect, Byrd displays a condescending paternalistic attitude towards African Americans where, on one hand, he's disgusted by slavery and lynching, but on the other hand, he asserts that blacks will never be as intelligent as whites, vocally opposes mixed racial relationships, and shudders at the thought of blacks wielding any political power. The high white forehead cannot be ruled by the low black one, he writes. For Byrd, the slave trade was a double mistake. since it proved a humanitarian disaster, and it meant that his Anglo-Saxon country was now tainted by minorities. In his words, the Negro's introduction into this hemisphere has proved a colossal blunder, a misfortune alike to both races. So Congress buys 3 provinces in Venezuela to be used as a Negro reservation. And apparently, America's African population is more than happy to relocate to an entirely different continent if it means no longer dealing with racist whites. Everyone wins. Nowhere in this chapter does Byrd reference Liberia or the American Colonization Society, leading me to believe he was unfamiliar with such attempts at resettling African Americans and the terrible disasters they were. If 19th century freedmen did not like relocating to Africa, we have extraordinarily little reason to believe 20th century black Americans would be content abandoning the new world that has become their own and getting shipped off to Venezuela. Like a lot of other late 19th century Americans, Byrd recognizes the potential of electricity. He predicts electric cars, electric bicycles, electric alarm systems, you name it. Electricity also helps us end debt. Does that sound bizarre? Well, listen to this proposal. If a debtor owes a creditor more than $50, an electric battery is strapped to the debtor. If the debt is 3 months overdue, the creditor is legally obligated to administer an electric shock equivalent in volts to the amount of money owed. Now, hardly anyone gets into debt anymore, presumably because no one takes out loans anymore. Electricity also allows us to end rabies, or hydrophobia as Byrd calls it. When dogs turn 1 year old, we simply use electricity to take out their teeth and then fit them with artificial dentures. And in fairness, the US has virtually ended rabies within its borders, but through the more boring tactic of vaccinations. I guess Byrd was just convinced electricity would solve every problem. Speaking of electricity and dental health, Byrd also proposes a solution for the fear of the dental office. In the future, if you have a toothache, you can just call up the dentist, and he can operate from miles away using electrical forceps. It's a bit unclear exactly how this works, but it wouldn't be a stretch to say Byrd's describing an early sort of telerobotics or teleoperation. I think it's funny, though, that this idea of using electricity to control tools from far away starts and stops with the dentist. Like a lot of his contemporaries, Byrd imagined the world would make tremendous strides in aerial navigation over the coming century, and for purposes beyond Death Angels. Byrd calls the flying machines of the future aerodromes. They're incredibly lightweight, and the largest ones can carry tens of passengers. Byrd also imagines single-passenger aerocycles. These new contraptions overtake bicycles in popularity, making bikes relics of a species of refined barbarism. Byrd predicts that a flight from New York City to Mexico City will be as short as 15 hours, and a flight from New York City to San Francisco will be as short as 36, each including 3 stops. Of course, in our timeline, these flights only take about 5 to 6 hours, no stops required, and private jets get there even faster. But he also acknowledges that with flight comes danger, and beyond mid-air collisions, Byrd predicts that if airships get too high, they'll escape Earth's gravity. Here's a snipping from a newspaper article of the future Byrd provides. The transoceanic air freighter Pontiac has been overdue at Veracruz for 10 days. It is feared the ship has got snarled in the upper ether currents. As she has not been spoken by other airships, it is probable that she has drifted away from the influence of the Earth's gravitation and drawn into the orbit of some neighboring planet. It may land in Mars. Honestly, this is one element of sci-fi I really wish were true. Imagine getting a free trip to Mars because some turbulence knocked your flight to the red planet. There's no kissing in Looking Forward. Byrd has the practice banned on purely hygienic grounds. Instead, people pat each other on the cheek. A pressure of the hand became ample compensation for the most ardent lovers, while the matchless language of the eyes left no room for doubt in a lover's breast that his love was reciprocated. That's quite possibly the most passionless, waspy sentence I've ever read. One of Byrd's prophecies that I remember the most vividly from my first time reading the book is his solution to wife-beating. Are you ready? Wife-beaters are strapped to cranes next to bodies of water, and they're submerged 4 times in a row. After that, they're taken back to jail-land, given refreshment and a cup of strong coffee, and admonished to go forth and do better. That's an oddly specific punishment, and I really wonder what made Byrd come up with it. He also has an interesting attitude towards tobacco. He's disgusted by cigarettes and chewing tobacco, so he has the manufacture and sale of cigarettes outlawed, as well as the public spitting of tobacco. But not Cuban cigars, which become trendy and only cost 1 cent in 1999, making them affordable even to working men. The object was to place a good, harmless cigar within the reach of everyone, and to discourage the chewing and cigarette practices. Honestly, this section is such a beautiful display of cognitive dissonance. Bird openly condemns cigarettes for their destructiveness to personal and public health, but he just genuinely thinks that cigars are cool, and he sees no contradiction in outlawing cigarettes, yet encouraging cigar production. Bird also makes some interesting culinary predictions. You got readily digested dinners, or the old food in a pill trope. Apparently this idea dates to a little before Bird's time, pioneered by Mary Elizabeth Lease. But most notably, Bird imagines horse becoming an American dietary staple by 1999. In part, I think it's because Bird sees the writing on the wall that the automobile and the combine harvester will put the horse out of work. So what do we do with all these excess horses? Eat them. But also, Bird seems to genuinely think that horses will make a good source of protein. Has this prediction come true? Unfortunately for Bird, we have to say nay. Anyway, that's the gist of the book. Anyone's detailed prediction of the future is invariably a deep dive into their psychology, and Looking Forward is no exception. The book encapsulates the contradictions that propelled the world into the 20th century. Progressive social visions and racial bigotries, scientific enthusiasm and religious nostalgia, and most importantly, a fervent nationalism fueled by the erasure of smaller nations. I'd give the book a generous 2 out of 5 stars. Most of Bird's predictions are amusing in their own way, but his American exceptionalism massively clouds his judgment and makes the book unbearable to read at times. It's a quirky read, but I'm not going out of my way to buy a hard copy.